Hi students, welcome to today's class. So in the class, we are going to discuss previous year questions from June 2023 UGC NET Sociology, and I have taken questions from this unit, Research Methodology and Methods. And in the unit 1, it is a very important unit for both paper 1 and paper 2 Sociology. We can expect question from this unit like research methods, sampling techniques, etc in your paper 1 also. So this is a very, very important unit and please pay attention to the class. So let's move to our first question. Arrange the sources of knowledge in order of their usage of performance in social research. So the question means you have to arrange the sources of knowledge. These are sources of knowledge, reasoning, sense perceptions, intuition, authority. இதெல்லாம் வந்து different kinds of sources of knowledge. And you have to arrange these in order of their usage in social research. So first of all, you have to understand what is sources of knowledge. What is sources of knowledge? So these are different kinds of sources of knowledge: sense experience, faith, authority, reason, intuition, revelation. Okay, is it clear? These are different kinds of sources of knowledge. And each of these sources of knowledge, each and every one of the sources of knowledge offers a unique perspective on acquiring knowledge. Is it clear? So our first source was the sense experience. Sense experience is the most fundamental source of knowledge. It was a very, very important and fundamental source of knowledge. And it involves gathering information through our five senses. So in this sense experience, we gather information or knowledge using our five senses. Which are they? Which are our five senses? Sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. So we gather information using these senses. That is sense experience. So it is pretty clear from the name itself, sense experience. And this sense experience is based on direct observation and interaction with the world around us. So we collect knowledge using our direct observation and interaction with the world around us. Is it clear? I'll say an example for sense experience, which is like seeing a rainbow or feeling the warmth of a fire or like tasting a ripe fruit. These are all examples of sense experience. We are learning a new thing by doing these activities or doing these different things. Like I have depicted in this picture itself, these kids are learning new things using their senses. So that is sense experience, and it was the most fundamental source of knowledge. Is it clear? So our next source of knowledge was the faith. Faith relies on belief and trust in something without empirical evidence or logical proof. So faith basically means a source of knowledge which depends on belief and trust in something without empirical evidence or logical proof. So in faith, we won't consider is there any empirical evidence or is there any logical proof for that. We just believe and trust something without any empirical evidence or logical proof. Is it clear? And this faith often involves religious or spiritual beliefs, but it can extend beyond that as well. So faith on the kind of religious or spiritual beliefs, other than nama faith and solve, but it can extend beyond that as well. It is not, restricted to religious or spiritual beliefs. It can extend beyond that as well. And also faith provides individuals with a framework for understanding the world, answering existential questions, and guiding their moral values and behavior. So these are the basic knowledges or different kind of knowledge which faith provides. So faith provides us with knowledge like or guide people through their moral values and behaviors, and faith answers questions related to our existence, and it also helps people or provide them with a framework for understanding the world. And faith can also offer knowledge about the meaning of life, the existence of a higher power, or the nature of the divine. So these are the knowledge which faith can provide. Is it clear? I hope it is clear. Now let's move to our next source of knowledge, which is authority. So it is a source of knowledge which involves relying on the expertise and credibility of others who possess specialized knowledge or expertise in a particular field. So in the authority layer, we rely on the expertise and credibility of other person, uh, and that person should have specialized knowledge in a particular field. So we depend on that person's expertise. That is known as authority. And this can include, or this authority can be experts, professionals, scholars, or individuals in positions of authority. So that can be experts. So it is simple. When we don't know something, we seek help of others, like experts in their subjects or professionals, or we seek help of our teachers. So that is basically what is authority. We seek the help of other people who have credible knowledge in that particular field. And authority can provide knowledge by consulting reliable sources such as academic research, expert opinions, or trusted publications. And we often turn to authority when we lack personal expertise or the information is beyond our direct experience. So when we, seek the help of authority, when we lack personal expertise or the information is beyond our direct experience. Is it clear? So the next source of knowledge is reason. Reason is pretty easy. It is the use of logical and rational thinking to acquire knowledge. So, using reason, how we acquire knowledge? We acquire knowledge using logical and rational thinking. And it involves critical thinking, deductive and inductive reasoning, and evaluating evidence and arguments. So, reasoning includes what kind of thinking? Like in reasoning, we use critical thinking, we use deductive and inductive reasoning, and we use evaluative evidence and arguments. And also, reasoning allows us to analyze information, draw logical conclusions, and make informed judgments. And through reasoning, we can identify cause and effect relationships, we can recognize patterns and make logical deductions. So using these reasoning, we can identify cause and effect relationships and recognize patterns, and we can also make logical deductions. And in the reasoning one, it is very crucial in scientific inquiry. It is very crucial in scientific inquiry. So we use reasoning in scientific inquiry, and also we use reasoning in problem solving and decision making. So that it is reasoning, it is basically the use of logical and rational thinking. That is the keyword. Whenever you see this logical and rational thinking, you have to write that it is reasoning. Next source of knowledge is intuition. It is a source of knowledge that relies on instinctive or gut feelings without conscious reasoning or evidence. So intuition, we would say gut feeling. Isn't it? Gut feeling. It is basically that. It is a gut feeling, or we relies on our instinct. It is, there is no conscious reasoning or evidence is part of this intuition. We just trust our feeling or our inner feeling that, oh, that would be right or that would be wrong. So that is just it. It is basically a source of knowledge which relies on our gut feeling, and it involves a deep understanding or insight gained without apparent logical processes. There is no logical processes is included in this. It is just a deep understanding or insight gained without any logical processes. Basically, we just trust our instinct. And this intuition is often associated with subconscious information processing and drawing on past experiences. So, in the intuition, it can be related to our past experiences, or we can, draw our knowledge from our subconscious information processing. So basically, the intuition is related to our past experiences, and it can also manifest as a hunch. You know that word hunch? We use that word often in our conversation, daily conversations, like, oh, I have a hunch about that. I think it would be like that. So intuition is just that. It is like a hunch, or it is just an immediate understanding of a situation without being able to articulate why. We don't know why we just feel like that. We often have some feelings like, oh, I shouldn't do that. It would end up very bad. We don't know why we think like that, but we just have a feeling like that. That is known as hunch. We can't give any reason why we think like that or why we have a feeling like that. We just don't know why. But we just have a feeling, a hunch like that. So that is basically intuition. And this intuition can be very much influential in decision making. It can influence our decisions, and it is subjective and can vary between individuals. So, ஒரு individuals வந்து this intuition can be different. It is subjective, and intuitions can sometimes be conflicting. It can sometimes be opposing in nature. Our next source is revelation. So it is a knowledge that is believed to be revealed by a divine or supernatural source. So revelation is a knowledge that is, we believe, which is given by a god or a divine power, or we got through some supernatural source. And this revelation is often associated with religion or spiritual experiences in which individuals, uh, people claim to receive direct communication or insight from a higher power, um, like and the in the all devangal, like they would say some, you know they say that, or they claim that they got direct communication from a higher power. So like that, revelation is like that. We believe to be, uh, we got that knowledge from a divine or supernatural source. And this revelation can provide insights into religious doctrines, moral principles, or metaphysical truths. But however, this revelation is also subjective and personal. It is not a universal truth. It is also, revelation is also subjective and personal. And this revelation also depends on individual experiences. Is it clear? So that is all our sources of knowledge. And one thing which is important is that these sources of knowledge are not mutually exclusive. They are not different from each other. These all of these sources of knowledge can interact and complement each other. Is it clear? They can interact and complement each other. I would explain it using an example. For example, we can take scientific discoveries. Scientific discoveries can include, or it can be based on both sense experience and reason, isn't it? So, when one person makes a scientific discovery, that discovery is based on both his sense experience and reason. For example, or another example, religious belief. Religious belief may incorporate elements of faith and revelation. Religious beliefs can include elements of both faith and revelation. So, like that, these sources of knowledge can interact and complement each other. They are not mutually exclusive. So back to our question. This was our question. Arrange the sources of knowledge in order of their usage of performance in social research. So in social research, how we use sources of knowledge, or which one we use mostly? And the answer is option 3, B, A, D, C. So which one we use mostly? We use sense perception first, then come reasoning. Next is authority or disciplinary, and we would use intuition at last. Intuition have less importance in social science research. Sense perception is the important one, and then reason. Hope it is clear. Now let's move to our next question. Merit of the interview method of data collection. So in the question lab, we have to identify the merits of or positives of interview method of data collection. So, and the options are, it can cover a very wide geographical area. Option B, it can study quantitative aspects of any event. Option C, it is an effective way to study abstract personal factors. Option D, it is useful in the identification of unanticipated aspects of the respondent. So you have to choose any two options from these four options given here. So in order to answer this, of course, you have to know what is interview method. So interview method is considered as the best research tool or one of the best research tool, and it is like it helps to obtain rich information, and it helps to reach more precise conclusions. It helps to obtain rich information, and it helps to reach more precise conclusions, because in this interview method we can use, or we can we can collect physical indicators, we can record spontaneous emotions or affective responses, so they can it helps to obtain us rich information which we can't collect using other methods. So it is a very important method in social science research. But one thing is that this interview method may also consume a lot of effort, and it can be quite difficult to execute well, even though can be a little bit difficult to you know execute or conduct, and it can also consume a lot of effort, like it may take a lot of time, or it may take a lot of money for like traveling expenses and all. So it has some positives and negatives, has some merits and demerits, but it is a very important tool in social science research. So these are some of the definitions given by various thinkers about interview method. This is important. These are all very important thinkers in sociology, so you have to remember this. So PV Young defined interview method as a scientific method through which a person enters into the life of a stranger. And Gooden had defined interview method as a close space conversation or a dialogue between the investigator or interviewer and interviewee, or it is a process of social interaction between interviewer and interviewee. And then Kerlinger defined interview as a face-to-face interpersonal situation in which one asks questions to the other to get answers about a social problem. So just try to remember this. P.V. Young, Goodenhat, Kerlinger, they all gave, or they all defined interview. So next, characteristics of interview method. So these are the basic characteristics of interview method. First one is, it is goal driven. Interview method is a goal driven process, which means these interviews are conducted with a certain objective in mind. We conduct an interview with a particular goal in our mind, and there might be a need for knowledge or an issue that needs to be remedied, encouragement, or an issue which needs help, or it can be a personal issue. So in order to clear these kind of issues, we can conduct an interview method. So it is always a goal driven process. Next characteristics is the question answer format of interview method. In most of the time during an interview, one or more person, there can be one interviewer, or sometimes there will be more than one interviewer, and this person can ask, or they will ask questions, and another person will respond. So interview method is always in a question answer format. Next, it is organized in comparison to other forms of interactions. Like when we compare it to other forms of interaction, interviews frequently have more structures. Interviews, they have more structures, and but they need planning and also frequently follow a distinct patterns. Interviews have a distinct pattern, and they also need prior planning. And to accomplish this previously described things, specific behaviors are anticipated during an interview. So basically, interviews follow a kind of framework or a structure. That is what is given as organized. Interviews have an organized format. Next one is it is imbalanced. Here by imbalanced it means the total time taken by the interviewer and the interviewee. So the total time taken by the interviewer, which means the person who is taking the interview, and the interviewee, which is giving the response. So the time taken by them are not proportional. So normally, the interviewee or respondent speaks more. Interviewee speaks more, like for 70% of the discussion, the interviewee would be speaking, and the 30% of the discussion, the interviewer would ask questions. But this can be, determined by the sort of questions, or it can be depend on the sort of questions asked. But usually, it is 70-30 percentage. The interview will follow this 70-30 percentage proportion. Now, to the advantages of interview method. So when we consider personal interviews, these personal interviews typically provide a high proportion of returns, particularly when compared to surveys. So when we compare this interview with survey, interview can provide high proportion of returns or answers. And since virtually everyone can be approached and responded to, this interview method may be used to provide an almost ideal sample size for a given population. So nowadays we can virtually, conduct interviews. So it is very helpful to provide an almost ideal sample size for a given population. And when we consider questionnaires only literate people can answer questionnaire because they have to write the answers. But when we consider interviews, it is not focused on literate people. People just have to, orally give answers. So they doesn't need to be literate. So it is not focused on literate people like questionnaires. Then derived from the information obtained through other methods, information obtained through interviews is probably more accurate. When we compare the information collected through different methods, information collected through interviews is probably more accurate. And while conducting interview, the interviewee can clarify the topic to the person, or they can, correct any incorrect informations or unimportant responses on the site. So the answers or results we get from interviews tend to be more accurate. And we can also collect additional details about the informant's personality, like when we conduct an interview, we can observe பண்ணலாம் அந்த respondents ஓட body language. We can observe his personality, surroundings, and we can gather these factors also, which we can't do using other methods. So while conducting an interview, we can collect informations about the personality, surroundings of the informant, and it is helpful in understanding the findings. So this kind of informations can also influence the finding. Another important advantage of interview is its flexibility. Interview வந்து very much flexible. We can rearrange the questions according to the informant's time or the way the informant answers. And also interviews provide us with higher percentage of useful results. So these are the advantages of interview method. Now these are the limitations of interview method. The most important limitation is money, effort, and time. Interview can be sometimes unprofitable and can be frequently impossible due to the expense of traveling, the time needed to visit all the locations if the region is a big one, and there are chances that when we reach the place to take interview, there are chances that someone may not be available at all. So it is a quite risky thing to conduct an interview because it takes a lot of money, effort, and time. And the effectiveness of interviews depends on the competence and comprehensive training of interviewers. Interview வந்து very much dependent on the interviewer, the competence and comprehensive training of the interviewer, and also it depends on their strict oversight of them. So, in the absence of this competence of the interviewer, the data collected could be unreliable and inadequate. Which means if the interviewer is not good enough, the data collected can also be, unreliable and inadequate. Another issue is of the bias. The returns could be distorted by the human equation, which means a biased interviewer may create questions to get answers that support his beliefs. If the interviewer is biased, there is chances for him to make adjustments in the questions, or for him to construct questions which would support his beliefs. And there are also chances of false information, because the interviewer's immediate appearance may overexcite the participant, and it can possibly lead to the point where the respondent may give false information to make the interview more fascinating. So these are the limitations of interview method. So back to our question, merits of interview method. And the answer is option 3, C and D only. So the option C is, it is an effective way to study abstract personal factors. Of course, using interview method, we can study abstract personal factors which we can't collect through other data collection methods. And option D, it is useful in the identification of unanticipated aspects of the respondent. We can observe his personality, we can observe his surroundings using interview method, which is not possible using methods like survey or questionnaire. Why this option A and B is incorrect? Option A is, it can cover a very wide geographical area. Is it possible? Not at all possible, because in interview method we have to go or meet each and every person. So it cannot cover a wide geographical area because it would take a lot of time and money. And it can study quantitative aspects of an event. No, it is very much difficult to study quantitative aspects of an event using interview method. So the right answers are option C and D. Next question. Next question is about survey method. In social survey, which kind of methods are used? Or what is right according to social survey? Social survey oda features edella. So what is a social survey? So a social survey is a research method used to collect data about people's attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, or characteristics within a population. So this is the definition of a social survey. Social survey is a research method used to collect data about people's attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, or characteristics within a population. It typically involves gathering information from a sample of individuals through questionnaires, interviews, or observations. And also, social surveys aim to understand social phenomena, or explore trends, or investigate specific aspects of society by systematically collecting and analyzing data to draw conclusions and make inferences about larger populations. So it was a very important aspect of social survey. How we collect data systematically. So in social survey, we collect data systematically and we analyze the data systematically. So it is a systematical process of collecting and analyzing data from using a sample. So these are the key steps of the methodology for conducting a social survey. First one is defining objectives. Defining objectives means it clearly outlines the research goals and what information needs to be gathered. And it also determines the scope and purpose of the survey, which means in defining objectives, we would outline, we clearly outline the research goals, what we have to achieve in this study or using this survey, and நம்ம வந்து என்ன informations we have to collect. So that is the first step, defining objectives. Second step is sampling. Sampling means we have to select a representative sample from the population of interest. We have to select a sample from the population we have to study, and the sample should mirror the characteristics of the larger population to ensure that the findings can be generalized. So we cannot select any kind of sample, but the sample we are selecting should mirror the characteristics of the larger population we have to study. Then only we can generalize our findings. The next step is questionnaire or interview design. In this step, the researcher would develop survey questions that would align with the research objectives. So we basically design questions according to our research objectives. So like what we have to find out, we would design questions according to that. And these questions should be clear, unbiased, and relevant to the topic being studied. In the questions how it should be clear, unbiased, and relevant to the topic being studied. Next step is pilot testing. So pilot testing means before administering the survey to the entire sample, before we take the survey to the entire sample, we would conduct a pilot test, a pre-study we can say, with a smaller group. So before conducting the survey to the sample we have already selected, we would conduct the study like as a trial within a smaller group to identify any issues with the questionnaire to interview structure. So we conduct this pilot study to understand if there are any issues with the questionnaire or interview structure. And in the pilot testing one, the very helpful to refine the survey instrument. So it is a very important step in research or in social survey, pilot testing. Next step is data collection. So in data collection step, the researcher would administer the survey to the selected sample, or he or she would conduct the survey among the selected sample. And this data collection could be through face-to-face interviews or phone interviews, or it could be through online questionnaires or mail surveys. So the mode of data collection would depend on the chosen methodology. Next step is data analysis. So once the data is collected, it undergoes analysis. We will do the analysis. So this data analysis involves first we organize the data, then we clean the data, by removing unwanted informations or excess informations, and then processing the data to draw meaningful conclusions. So what we need from a social survey is meaningful conclusions. And for data analysis, we use, or the researcher use, statistical tools, and there are also so many softwares for like SPSS for data analysis in research. So this is the step data analysis. Next step is interpretation and reporting. So in this step, after collecting the data from data analysis, we would analyze the findings and interpret the results in the context of the research objectives. We would interpret the results based on our research objectives. And the researcher would present the conclusions and insights obtained from the survey in a clear and comprehensive manner, often through reports or presentations. So this interpretation and reporting would be basically through reports or presentations. Then the final step is ethical consideration. So in this step, the researcher has to ensure that ethical guidelines such as informed consent and confidentiality are followed throughout the survey process to protect the participants' rights and privacy. This is a very important thing while we consider the ethics of social science research or any kind of research. We have to, or the researcher have to ensure that the ethical guidelines are already met, like informed consent and confidentiality are followed throughout the survey process in order to protect the participants' rights and privacy. So, by following these steps, social surveys provide valuable insights into various social phenomena, and it helps researchers to. So, in social survey method, the right options are A, B, D, and E. So, option C is not right according to social survey, which means standardized information is obtained by asking diverse set of questions to all members of sample. This is not right. We don't ask diverse set of questions to all members of sample. Instead, we would ask the same set of questions to all members of the sample. How can we generalize the result if we ask diverse set of questions to the sample? It's not possible. So the right answer is option A, B, D, E only, which is methods of questionnaire and structured interviews are used to gather data. Standardized information is collected from a sample selected as being representative of the selected population. Standardized information is obtained asking same sets of questions to all members of the sample, and both analytical and descriptive perspective can be made inbuilt in social survey. To our next question, arrange the following steps of research from initial to final stage. So in the question, you have to arrange these steps of research. So இது வந்து 4 steps of research and you have to arrange this from initial to final stage. So what are the options? Review of literature, bibliography, primary data collection, and statement of the problem. So steps of research. Social science research typically involves several stages. So the first stage is identifying the research problem. So in this stage, the researcher would select a topic or define the research question and outline the objectives of the study. So in identifying the research problem, the researcher would select a topic, define the research questions, and outline the objectives of the study. Next step is, or next stage is, literature review. So the researcher reviews existing scholarly works, articles, or books and other sources related to the chosen topic in order to understand the existing knowledge, debates, and gaps in the field. So that is literature review. Next stage is formulating hypothesis or research questions. So based on the literature review, which is the previous stage, the researcher would develop hypotheses or research questions that guide the study. That is formulating hypothesis or research questions. Next stage is research design. In this stage, the researcher would determine the methodology, approach, and research design to collect and analyze data. What kind of methodology should we follow, or what approach should we adopt, or what research design to use to collect and analyze data? It is decided in this stage. And this stage could involve qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method approaches. So the researcher can use either qualitative methods or quantitative methods or quantitative design, or he or she can use mixed methods approaches. Next stage is data collection. So this stage involves gathering relevant data using methods such as surveys, interviews, experiments, observations, or archival research. So the data when how the researcher would collect data using methods such as surveys, interviews, experiments, observations, archival research, etc. Next stage is data analysis. In this stage, the researcher analyzes the collected data using appropriate statistical or qualitative analysis techniques depending on the research design and nature of the data. So in the stage, the researcher would analyze the collected data using statistical or qualitative analysis techniques. So this would depends on the research design and nature of the data. The researcher would either use statistical analysis techniques or qualitative analysis techniques. After data analysis, next stage is interpretation of results. So the researcher would find conclusions based on the analyzed data and the researcher would interpret the findings in the context of the research question or hypothesis. So after interpretation of results, the next stage is discussion and conclusion. In this stage, uh, the researcher would discuss the implications of the findings, their significance in relation to the existing literature, and concluding the research by summarizing key findings and their broader implications. So, in the stage, the researcher would discuss or uh, give the implications of the findings or significance in relation to the existing literature, and he would conclude the research by summarizing the key findings. The last stage is publication and dissemination. So in the stage, sharing of the research findings. How we can share the research findings? We can share our research findings through academic publications, or we can share it through conferences or other platforms. And why we share our research findings? We share our research findings to contribute to the field and encourage further research and discussions. So these are the basic steps of research, but these stages are not always linear, and they can overlap or they can be revisited as the research progresses. And the process might also vary based on the specific nature of the social science discipline and the research course, but these are the basic steps we follow in social science research. Back to our question. The question like we have to arrange steps of research from initial to final stage. So the answer is option 2, D, A, C, B. Which one comes first? The first is statement of the problem. Next, review of literature. Adukapram, primary data collection, and after that, it will last on bibliography. Next question. Identify the type of sampling among the following in which the inferential statistics cannot be applied. So here, there are some sampling methods given, and we have to identify to which we cannot apply inferential statistics. So the options are simple random sampling, stratified sampling, purposive sampling, and multi-stage random sampling. So what is inferential statistics? So in order to answer this question, you have to first understand what is inferential statistics. So inferential statistics in social science research means it is also a branch of statistics that enables the researchers to make inferences, or it helps the researcher to find conclusions about a population based on data collected from a sample of that population. So it helps the researcher to find or draw a conclusion from the sample of that population. So inferential statistics involves using sample data to make generalizations, predictions, or hypotheses about the larger population from which the sample was drawn. Is it clear? So the key aspects of inferential statistics. First one is sampling. So the researcher collect data from a subset, or we call it sample, of the larger population of interest. It is not possible to collect, data from each and every one of the population which we want to study. It would take a lot of um, time and money. It would be very expensive. So what the researcher would do is, the researcher would collect data from a sample of the larger population of interest, and the sample should ideally represent the population to which the researcher wants to generalize the findings. So the sample should ideally represent the population which the researcher wants to study. Then next is hypothesis testing. So in this inferential statistic, it includes various techniques for testing hypothesis or making predictions about the population parameters such as means or proportions or correlations, etc. And it is based on the characteristics observed in the sample. So it basically include various techniques for testing hypothesis. Next is estimation. It involves estimating population parameters such as means or proportions based on sample statistics. And confidence intervals are often used to estimate the range within which a population parameter is likely to fall. Next is statistical inference. So this process involves using statistical tests to determine if observed differences or relationships in the sample are likely to reflect true differences or relationship in the larger population, or if they occur due to random chance. It is this stage is very important, statistical inference, because the researcher have to find out either the observations are likely to reflect true differences or relationships, or either they occur due to random chances. So this stage is very important, statistical inference. So in social science research, this inferential statistics help researchers to draw conclusions, or it help them to make predictions, and help them to generalize the findings from a sample to a broader population. And techniques like t-test, ANOVA test, regression analysis, or chi-square test, and other tests fall under this umbrella of inferential statistics. So we basically use tests like t-test, ANOVA test, regression analysis, chi-square test, etc. And this would helps to understand the relationships, differences, and associations among variables within the social phenomena. Is it clear? So now you know what is inferential statistics. Now let's move to our options. Our first option was simple random sampling. What is simple random sampling? It is a method used in research to select a sample from a larger population where each member of the population has an equal probability of being chosen, and every possible sample of a certain size has the same chance of being selected. So it is a very common or popular type of sampling used in social science research. So these are the key features of simple random sampling. First one is, of course, random selection. So every individual in the population has an equal chance of being selected for the sample. And this selection process is typically done through random methods like lottery or random number generators or random tables. So the selection is random. Next key feature is independence. So the each selection is made independently of others, which means that the selection of one individual does not affect the probability of another individual being chosen. The selection is made completely independent of each other. Next feature is equal probability. So every possible sample of the desired size has an equal chance of being selected. And this would ensure the unbiased representation from the population. So simple random sampling would help to avoid bias to an extent. So simple random sampling is often considered one of the most straightforward and unbiased sampling techniques, especially when the population is relatively small and easily accessible. However, it might be challenging or impractical for large or widely dispersed populations. So, simple random sampling is very useful for studying small and easily accessible population. Otherwise, it would be difficult for studying large populations. And this method helps researchers to generalize findings from the sample to the entire population with greater confidence by assuming that the sample is truly representative and selected randomly from the population of interest. So, this method helps researchers to generalize findings from the sample to the entire population. Is it clear? Is it clear about simple random sampling? So now let's move to our next sampling, stratified sampling. So stratified sampling is a sampling technique used in research where the population is divided into distinct subgroups or strata based on certain characteristics that are relevant to the study, and then samples are randomly selected from each subgroup. So in stratified sampling, first, the population is divided into different subgroups or strata based on certain characteristics which are relevant to the study. Then Samples are randomly selected from each of that subgroups. And yeah, these are the key features of stratified sampling: stratification, random sampling within strata, and representativeness. So before that, the stratified sampling is beneficial or useful when the population exhibits significant variability in certain characteristics, which means if the population is very much different or diverse, we can use this stratified sampling. So by dividing the population into different strata and then sampling within these strata, so it would ensure that each subgroup is properly represented in the sample, and this would reduce sampling variability, and it would potentially provide more precise estimates for each stratum. And this method can also enhance the accuracy of the findings, especially when analyzing specific subgroups within the population. So it can enhance the accuracy of the findings. So back to the key features of stratified sampling. First one is stratification. So the population is divided into mutually exclusive and homogeneous subgroups called strata. And these strata are defined based on specific characteristics, such as it can be age or gender or income level or geographical location. So basically, the population is divided into mutually exclusive and homogeneous subgroups based on some specific characteristics. Then random sampling within the strata. So after creating the strata, random samples are independently selected from each of the subgroups, and the sample size from each stratum can be proportional to the size of the stratum, or it can be based on a desired level of precision within each subgroup. Then representativeness. So the goal is to, or the ultimate goal is to ensure that each stratum is represented adequately in the sample, which would give more accurate estimation and analysis within each subgroup. So that is stratified sampling. Next option is purposive sampling. So purposive sampling is also known as judgmental sampling or selective sampling or subjective sampling. So these are other terms which we use to describe purposive sampling: judgmental, selective, or subjective sampling. And purposive sampling is a non-probability sampling technique. You have to remember that it is a non-probability sampling technique which is used in research, where the researcher deliberately or the researcher intentionally selects specific individuals or cases based on some predefined criteria or their expertise or judgment about the characteristics required for the study. Unlike other sampling methods, we don't select the samples randomly. In purposive sampling, the researcher deliberately selects specific individuals or cases in purposive sampling. And there are, unlike probability sampling methods, purposive sampling does not rely on random selection, which I already told you. Instead, participants or cases are chosen intentionally based on the researcher's understanding of the population and the study's goals. And there are various types of purposive sampling, such as maximum variation sampling, in which selecting diverse cases to capture a wide range of perspectives. Then there are typical case samplings, in which typical or average cases are selected. Then there is snowball sampling, which utilizing referrals from existing participants. And then there are expert sampling, in which selecting individuals with specific expertise or knowledge. So these are different kinds of or very different types of purposive sampling: variation sampling, typical case sampling, snowball sampling, expert sampling, etc. Then purposive sampling is commonly used in qualitative research, where the focus is on depth and understanding rather than generalized ability. So instead of generalization, when the research is giving more focus to depth and understanding, then we can use purposive sampling. It allows researchers to target specific groups or individuals who have unique knowledge or experience related to the research topic. So the researcher can make it useful for studies where access to certain populations or specific expertise is crucial. But however, the findings derived from purposive samples might not be representative of the entire population. So we can't do the generalization with purposive sampling. So when it comes to inferential statistic, I have already told you that inferential statistics are based on probability sampling methods where the sample is selected randomly from the population, ensuring each member has an equal chance of being included. But in purposive sampling, it involves non-random, selective and subjective selection of participants or cases based on specific criteria. So purposive sampling doesn't have the randomization required for the assumptions of inferential statistics to hold true. So there are a few reasons why using inferential statistics with purposive sampling can be problematic, like lack of randomness. So in inferential statistics, it relies on the principle of randomness to make inferences about a larger population, isn't it? But in purposive sampling, participants or cases are intentionally chosen. Intentionally chosen based on some kind of criteria or researcher's judgment, so it does not represent a random selection process. Then there is bias and non-representativeness. So purposive sampling introduces bias because the sample is not randomly drawn from the entire population. The selected participants or cases might not be representative of the entire population due to the subjective nature of selection. So it limits the generalizability of findings. Then there is violation of assumptions. So, this inferential statistical techniques often assume random selection and independence of observations and assumptions that are not met in purposive sampling. So, these assumptions are fundamental for the validity of statistical test and the interpretation of results, which are purposive sampling techniques lacks. Then there is difficulty in generalization. Purposive sampling is typically used in qualitative research where the focus is on depth and understanding rather than generalizability. So, as a result, findings derived from a purposive samples are not intended to be generalized to the larger population. We can't generalize results collected using purposive sampling to the larger population. It is very much subjective. So, inferential statistics are not suitable for analysis involving purposive samples because the lack of randomness and representativeness. And researchers often employ descriptive statistics and qualitative analytical methods to explore patterns, themes, or relationships within the selected sample. And these kind of approaches allow for an in-depth understanding of the characteristics or experiences of the specific participants or cases chosen through purposive sampling. So now it is clear that we can't use purposive inferential statistics in data collected through purposive sampling. But anyway, let's look at our next option also, which is multi-stage random sampling. So multi-stage random sampling, it is a complex sampling techniques which involves multiple stages of sampling. As the name suggests itself, it involves multiple stages of sampling to select a representative sample from a larger population. So in the multi-stage random sampling, there is multiple stages of sampling to select a representative sample. So this is used particularly when a simple random sample is impractical due to logistical constraints or the structure of the population. So we usually use multi-stage random sampling if there is when simple random sampling is not possible. And key features of multi-stage random sampling, these are the key features. Staged selection process. So it involves breaking down the population into smaller and more, more manageable units or clusters at each stage. So ഓരോ സ്റ്റേജിലെയും the population is smaller and more manageable units. We would break down the population into smaller and more manageable units or clusters. And these stages might include selecting clusters, then units within those clusters, and potentially further subdivisions until the final sample units are chosen. Then random sampling at each stage. At each stage, random sampling techniques are used to select units or clusters. And this process can include techniques like simple random sampling, stratified sampling, or systematic sampling, depending on the structure of the population and available resources. So, after staging or converting the population into smaller stages, random sampling techniques are used to select units or clusters on each of these stages. And it can use techniques like simple random sampling, stratified sampling, or systematic sampling. And it will depend on the structure of the population and available resources. The next step is cluster sampling. And usually in multi-stage random sampling, it would involve cluster sampling. And in cluster sampling, the larger groups or clusters within the population are randomly selected in the initial stages, followed by sampling within those clusters in subsequent stages. So at first, clusters are selected randomly from the larger population, followed by sampling within those clusters in subsequent stages. Then there is logistical efficiency. So this multi-stage sampling is useful for large and geographically dispersed population. So it is useful when the population is large and it is geographically dispersed. So this is very much logistically efficient, making it more feasible and cost effective to conduct surveys or studies. And this multi-stage random sampling also helps in reducing the complexities of data collection. As we are conducting or dividing the sample into different stages, it would helps in reducing the complexities of data collection. Another key feature is increased precision. So even though it is a complex process, multi-stage random sampling can lead to a sample that represents the population well when performed correctly. If the processes are performed or done correctly, this multi-stage random sampling would lead the researcher to a sample that represents the population very well. And it allows for more precise estimation compared to single-stage sampling methods. Is it clear? So this multi-stage random sampling, it is commonly used in various fields, like usually in large-scale surveys or studies where the population is vast and widely distributed. So when the population is vast and widely distributed, it would make the study difficult to conduct simple random sampling. So in such conditions, we would use multi-stage random sampling. And this would also help researcher to obtain a representative sample while managing logistical challenges and resources efficiently. So that is multi-stage random sampling. It is to select a representative sample from a larger population, and it includes multiple stages of sampling. So back to our question. Identify the type of sampling among the following in which the inferential statistics cannot be applied. Now you know the answer, which is purposive sampling, because it is a non-random sampling. Hope it is clear. So that's for today's class, students. Hope it is useful. Hope your preparations are going well. And for those who are preparing for the next UGC NET session, which is in 2024, Professors Academy's admissions are now open for UGC NET 2024, and we are providing classes for these subjects, including sociology. So if you are interested, you can contact these numbers given here. So ensure your seat and start preparing as early as possible so that you can clear UGC NET for the next cycle itself. So all the very best for everyone. See you in another class. Thank you.